For several weeks now, Washington and the rest of the country have been debating several new gun control proposals. Along with a number of my colleagues, including the minority leader, I've declared my intention to resist an immediate vote on any new restrictions that would serve primarily to limit the freedoms of law-abiding citizens rather than reduce violent crime in America. Unfortunately, the current gun control proposals would do just that. More than 2 weeks ago, we informed the majority leader that we will exercise our procedural right to require a 60-vote threshold in order to bring this legislation to the floor. We've taken this step under our Senate Rules of Procedure for three principal reasons. First, the Senate serves an important function in our republic by encouraging deliberation and making it more difficult for a temporary majority to impose its will unilaterally. Unlike the House of Representatives, the Senate's rules and procedures allow for meaningful debate and help ensure that a bare majority of senators cannot impose controversial legislation on the American people without robust debate, discussion, and broad-based and bipartisan consensus. Contrary to the statements made by the President and by some of my friends across the aisle, and even a few from within my own caucus, we have no intention of preventing debate or votes. Quite the opposite. By objecting to the motion to proceed, we guarantee that the Senate and the American people would have at least 3 additional days to assess and evaluate exactly how this particular bill might affect the rights of law-abiding citizens and whether or not it might have any significant impact on violent crime. Already, we've seen consensus against passing any new gun legislation, at least not without broad bipartisan support. During the recent budget debate, I offered an amendment to establish a 2/3 vote requirement for the passage of any new gun legislation. 6 Democratic senators voted with a nearly united Republican caucus to support my amendment by a vote of 50 to 49. That vote demonstrated that a bare majority of senators, including at least 6 Democrats, believe that new gun legislation should have broad bipartisan support in the Senate before it's passed and before it has the opportunity to become law. A 60-vote threshold will help ensure that new gun laws aren't forced through the Senate with the narrow support of just one party. Second, this debate is about a lot more than just magazine clips and pistol grips. It's about the purpose of the Second Amendment and why our constitutionally protected right to self-defense is an essential part of self-government. At its core, the Second Amendment helps ensure that individuals and local communities can serve as the first line of defense against threats to our persons and our property. Any limitation on this fundamental right of self-defense makes us more dependent on our government for our own protection. Government can't be everywhere at all times. So the practical effect of limiting our individual rights is to make us less safe. This is deeply troubling to many Americans. Any legislation that would restrict our basic right to self-defense deserves serious and open debate. Further, as we've seen just today, Washington sometimes prefers to negotiate backroom deals made in secret, far from the eyes of the American people, rather than engaging in thorough, open, and transparent debate right here on the Senate floor. The day before the majority leader has set the vote to proceed, the bill's critical components are still not there. Right before we have set the vote for the motion to proceed to the bill, we still don't know what these critical components look like. We have no legislative text to evaluate the so-called compromise language on background checks, and we have no sense of what amendments, if any amendments at all, might be allowed to be offered. So requiring a 60-vote threshold helps us solve some of these problems, and it helps us ensure that we have a meaningful debate rather than a series of backroom deals to push such controversial legislation through Congress with solely a bare majority to back it up. Finally, many of the provisions that we expect to see in the bill are both constitutionally problematic and would serve primarily to limit the freedoms of law-abiding American citizens. Some of the proposals, like, for example, universal background checks, would allow the federal government to surveil law-abiding citizens who exercise their constitutional rights. One of the provisions we expect to see in the bill, based on what we saw in the Judiciary Committee on which I sit, would allow the Attorney General of the United States to promulgate regulations that could lead to a national registry system for guns, something my constituents in Utah are very concerned about, and understandably so. You see, the federal government has no business monitoring where or how often you go to church, what books and newspapers you read, who you vote for, your health conditions, what you eat for breakfast, and the details of your private life, including your lawful exercise of rights protected by the Second Amendment and other provisions of the Bill of Rights. Such limitations may, of course, at times make it harder for the government to do what it feels like it needs to do. But we have to remember the Constitution was not written to maximize or protect the convenience of our government. The Constitution was written to protect individual liberty, and thankfully so. We must not narrow the application of constitutional protections in haste, nor should we allow a bare majority to jeopardize basic rights of the American people, rights protected in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. The Senate and the American people are engaged in an important debate today. I look forward to this debate, and I hope that others will join me and my colleagues in demanding that our discussions take place in full view of the American people. Thank you, Madam President. I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call